speaking now. Get ready. Here we come. Here we come. All right. So, hi, I'm Vicki Hendrickson. This is Jen.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for coming to the 14th Literary Festival.
Yeah, now, did you have a good time?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Did you see everyone you wanted to see? No, I know.
See, there's a secret to that. Because if you saw everybody that you wanted to see, then you'd say, oh, well, I mean, that was fun, but I saw everything I wanted to do. Do I need to do it again next year? But you see, you didn't get to see everything you wanted to see. And
Although next year it'll be all different people.
It'll be all different
really
people.
Work?
Well, yeah, it does, because we keep getting people back every year.
That's true. That's true.
All
right.
right.
Well, but we couldn't do it without a lot of other people. So we've got to thank all of our folks that have helped us put this together. So I think we're going to start with
authors.
Who are we starting? The authors.
Authors and moderators. Where are you? Stand up.
Do you have any here?
Come on.
Thank you.
Stand up. Authors, moderators. Woo, 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 woo.
We definitely couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, absolutely not. It would be a really boring day.
It would. Yeah. We also want to thank our bookstores. We are so lucky to have 2 independent bookstores in our town. So Jabberwocky and the Book Rack, thank you so much for being at every venue and taking such good care of us and getting all the books.
And we also have volunteers. Now, for everybody, there you are.
Yeah.
And so if you volunteered, stand up.
Yeah.
We'd love
you.
to thank you. Because when you go to any of the venues, you know that you're well directed, that somebody is in charge. Nobody gets to go over and talk too much. I can't imagine that that could happen.
Who would talk too much?
Who would talk
Vicki?
too much? No.
But we also have a steering committee that works on this behind the scenes all year long. So I do want to name some names here. So our steering committee includes Michael Cameron, Linda Carpino, Mavanwi Collins, Julie Cook, Bethany Durow, Hannah Harlow, Leslie Hendrickson, Nana Kennedy, Karen Kruger, Kara Marsh, Alfred Nicole, Giselle Stevens, Sky Wentworth, and Glee Woodworth. All of a sudden I was like, am I saying the same name again? No.
I know. So is anybody here?
So if you guys are here, yes.
Come on, all right.
Thank you.
Let's hear it for the gang. All right, and then we have partners and people that help us either with in-kind donations or with money. And those include the Greater Newburyport Chamber of Commerce, the Newburyport Public Library, the local cultural councils, Georgetown, Merrimack, Newbury, and Newburyport, West Newbury, and locally based foundations. And then, of course, the 2 banks, the Newburyport Bank, which used to be the Newburyport 5-cent Bank, so it's now changed to the Newburyport Bank, in case you were confused, and the Institution for Savings. Also, we have in-kind contributions from Bradford and Bigelow, the Daily News, the Current, the Town Common, and the Boston Globe.
And many donations from our
and many donations from
members.
our audience
So
members.
thank you to everyone.
Thank you, exactly. You look so good. I mean, I'm struggling to see you, but what I can see, you just look so good.
All right, well, so let's get the show started.
Yeah,
We've got a
it's
really
you're
great
on, babe.
event tonight.
You
All
are
right.
on.
So I want to introduce our moderator. Bethany Groff-Durow is a member of the Literary Festival Planning Advisory Committee, an author, and historian. She's the manager of 11 museum properties for historic New England, including the 1690 Spencer Pierce Little Farm in Newbury. She lives in West Newbury with her family. And Bethany, we will turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
I just got kicked in the shins. That's a nice how do you do. So I have a good friend that came to the opening session, and I saw her after that, and she said, well, it's all downhill from here. I said, well, great. By the end of it, the bar will be super low. So keep the bar super low, okay? It is one of the great pleasures of my life to be part of this festival. I'm impressed every time I go to a planning meeting with the level of dedication that the planning group, and of course Vicki and Jen are just priceless. They're wonderful. So thank you all so much. I can't see any of you, but you all look lovely. You're like bathed in pink light. It's wonderful. So actually, my presence on the planning committee has to do with how I got tasked to be up here today. I mentioned in one of the groups that my book club was turning 100 years old this year, and it turned into a conversation that resulted in what we're doing here today. So full disclosure, the 1919 book club is one that I'm a member of. It's one of two. The other one is sort of a maybe more typical sort of friends and wine book club. So I actually joined both of these book clubs. One of them I sort of helped to revive, and then one I joined because my life is so crazy that I need a deadline if anything's going to ever get done, including sort of reading for pleasure. So that's how, and of course it's had benefits in all sorts of other ways. But that was the impetus for me, was to make somebody force me to sit down and read. So that's been a great pleasure in my life. So when this idea sort of began coming to fruition, we sent out a survey. We had some savvy people in the planning committee that helped us do that. And between 30 plus groups answered the survey. And reading the survey answers was delightful. People talk about the groups that they're in with such passion, and they're such an incredible part of people's lives. It was very inspiring. And then I realized that anytime I've ever mentioned in a group of people that I'm in a book club, you immediately have that conversation of, what did you read? Okay, who picks the books? So there's a whole community of people who really connect to each other and to literature through book clubs. So I am thrilled. We looked at all of the respondents, and we asked 5 folks to represent their book club here today. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce our panelists here today. Wandering out from behind the curtain, here's Jana. This is going to be like Miss Universe. This is Doris, and Jean, and Ellie, and Earl with no E, or with an E. So if you would be so kind, just introduce yourself and your club and talk a little bit about how you got started and what makes you so awesome.
Wow. My name is Earl Ray. Anyone that's seen the wonderful promo, we started our book group basically sitting in front of a bakery, about 6 or 7 of us, and we were kind of hashing out what is the one book you would love to read, and 2 or 3 of us mentioned Moby Dick, and some had read it before, and others had said, oh, it's been sitting on my shelf for years. So we just started meeting. And we pulled together, eventually we had about 10 people, and I've mentioned this already, it's fascinating. We're about 50-50 men and women, which I've been in other book groups, and usually there's 2 guys. I mean, and even here you'll see the demographic generally. And I think what makes it wonderful is we've read, I'm going to give you a couple of the books we've read. We read Lolita, and being men and women in this group, it was just fascinating how the discussion went. And it was almost like men over here, women over here, a few exceptions. We also read the Bible, believe it or not. I'm not going to say I read every word. And the composition of our group was a Russian Orthodox, extreme, one would argue religious right Christian. We had people that were Buddhist. We had academics. We had a woman that was a minister for many years, but she was the softer side. And we would get in these heated debates. But it taught me something, that when you read a book, any book, we bring who we are to the book. And I found that extremely fascinating. The logistics, we were talking back there, how do we pick the books? I can't really say in this group. It sort of just magically happens. We started out with Moby Dick. We read To Kill a Mockingbird, Wallace Stegner's Crossing to Safety, Don Quixote. And then we had a splinter group, and I only share this because some people didn't want to read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. It's a fairly dark and violent work of literature. So we splintered off. So that's pretty much it. That's how we started. We've continued 6 or 7 years. One of our primary folks has moved to a retirement community that's about an hour away, so we're trying to figure out the logistics of how we're going to still be able to see him, because we meet almost weekly, except in the summer we splinter off for a month or so. So we're going to try to pull it together, meet him once a month so we can keep our group intact. So,
Thank you, Earl. Ellie?
Very nice. My book group began in 1983. I was not a member of it then. It began at the Unitarian Church, and it had a theme, very much like classes that are held at the Unitarian Church here in Newburyport. It was a class in feminism. Imagine. And many of us, Priscilla Belair's in the audience, myself, were teaching women's studies courses at Northern Essex Community College. So a number of the titles drifted to the book group. I really became active in the book group when I retired, and Linda Krause, who had begun it, was ready to leave it. And what I brought to the book group was quite different, in that feminism was feeling pretty comfortable and familiar, and we had done a lot of the basic books. And I tried to choose books that conversed with each other, that allowed us to have really good discussions. So they sort of sometimes looked like, a curriculum that was odd, like two on a topic. And there would be two books over 2 months on the same topic. And they did converse with each other. So I think we had very good conversations, and that's what I was after. Our book group, however, is all female because the men, as I understand it, were sort of kicked out of the Unitarian class. Is that right, Linda Wu? Yeah.
that's being validated, right?
So there you go. There you go.
Thank you, Ellie. How are your books chosen? Do you want to continue that theme from Earl?
Well, I've been a dictator. I'm afraid. I've tried, I've usually incorporated a title or two that people really were interested, but that it had to go with what our theme was. For instance, this year our theme was the two most popular themes in literature, war and love. And we did war backwards. We started with Vietnam, and then really I chose books that were told by the losers, for the most part, rather than the winners. So we did Vietnam, because I think the U.S. lost in Vietnam. We could argue about that, but let's not.
It's a different session.
We then moved on to Hiroshima by John Hersey, and incidentally, there's an article about Hiroshima as really right in the vanguard of creative nonfiction in the New Yorker this week. How nice. And then we moved on to a German telling of World War II, All for Nothing by Kompowski, which is quite a wonderful book of the Baltic area where there were really the Russians coming in. And so that was what German people had to deal with. And it was hard. And then we moved on to World War I, told from an Irishman's point of view, the Irish being still under British rule and being rebellious against that. And yet here was an Irish soldier called A Long, Long Way to Tipperary by Sebastian Barry. And that all was then followed by Love. But you wonder if the title shouldn't have been The Woe That Is in Marriage, because it started with Mrs. Osmond, someone, what's his name? Here I can, Banville, thank you. John Banville's writing a sequel rather, to Portrait of a Lady, what she would have done. And then we read Portrait of a Lady, and now we're reading Portrait of a Novel, how that was all done. And then we'll do poems in June at dinner, everyone's choice, whatever poem they want to bring about war or love.
Sounds like you're a benevolent dictator.
Pardon? Pardon?
You sounds like you are a benevolent dictator.
I
Appreciate
hope
that.
so.
Thank you, Ellie. Jean?
Hello. I have a little cough here, so if I break out in a spasm of hacking, please bear with me. I represent the West Newbury Book Club, and I have been coordinating that for about 6 years now. The group has been in existence for 10 years, and we're housed in the library in West Newbury. So we are open to anyone. Please come. We have a core group of maybe around 9 or 12, and probably 6 to 9 of us meet regularly depending on people's schedules. But we are focused because we have to finish our discussion before the library closes. Now we like that because it does focus us. I think we're going to change things up in the coming year though and go to someone's house maybe once or twice. But we don't want to get into that mode of just going to socialize over wine. We really want to look at the books, and we rotate the leadership. Basically, when the first leader of the book club moved on, I had a meeting with everyone to say, okay, how do you want to run this book club now? How do you want to do it? So we decided that we would rotate the leadership, and for the discussions. I still maintain the coordination and the reminders and send out reviews right before our meeting so people can get a different perspective on the book. And let's see, I lost my train of thought there. Boy, it happens more and more these days. The book club rotating leadership allows people to bring different perspectives to doing the discussion, to helping us understand things from different perspectives. Another thing we've added is that the leader brings some kind of thematic table setting and some kind of refreshment that goes with the book. We've had glorious Nigerian food. We've had star fruit when we did a book about astronomers in the 19th century. We've been all over the map, and we've been all over the map with our reading too. We have read, as I think I mentioned in the video, not only in nonfiction and fiction, but a graphic novel, short stories. Basically, we try to make sure that everyone's interest is represented, and we read after voting on several books. We'll kind of narrow it down to several books and then vote. And we've done a couple of interesting things too by way of the discussion. We read Two Sisters by Åsne Sierstad, a Norwegian journalist, a story of two young ladies from Norway. They're Somali raised but living in Oslo, who went off to marry ISIS fighters. True story, unfortunately. So I invited people to wear a hijab during our discussion to kind of get into the book a little bit more deeply, and all but one of us did, and it was a very interesting and revealing experience for us. But I have more things I can tell you later on, but I know Bethany wants to move on.
I forgot to say, we have a name, my book group, all 12 or 14 of us, and that is Ladies of the Book.
Very nice.
We're just the West Newbury Book Club right now.
Earl proudly announced that he has the No Name
No
Book
Name.
Club.
The no-name.
Doris.
I'm Doris Noyce, and I am a proud member of the 1919 Spencer Pierce Little Reading Club, which is celebrating our 100th anniversary this year.
But you haven't been in it all that time.
That was my next gift. None of us are original members. This group was started in 1919 by a group of amazing women who lived in the Newburyport area, were basically the Little family of the Spencer Pierce Little Farm. Aunt Eliza and cousins Margaret, Agnes, Amelia, and their cousins Nancy and Josephine, and then others that we're still trying to find out who the original members were. But these women met weekly in each other's homes. They met every Monday afternoon for tea, sandwiches, and a sweet. And they read to each other because libraries didn't have multiple copies of books at that time. So they would choose a book and they would read aloud to each other while the rest of them, the non-readers, were doing handwork, sewing, knitting, and during World War II, they were rolling bandages and they were knitting socks to be sent to the servicemen overseas. So these women were amazingly well educated. They were all professional women. They graduated with degrees in education, mathematics, from Smith and Wellesley and Radcliffe, and they needed an outlet for the intellectual abilities that they had. And the books that they chose, we've had a real fun time looking at some of the books that they chose, and they didn't read anything light or fluffy. They read really deep philosophy and history and medicine at that time. We've been trying to get a more complete list of what they read from 1919 on. They met weekly and they celebrated their 20th, 40th, and 50th anniversaries as a group. And then at that point, they were getting on in age. Many had moved away. They really couldn't maintain the reading club. So it lay dormant for several years. When Amelia Little, the last surviving member of this amazing family, passed on, the Spencer Pierce Little Farm was left to what was Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, which is now Historic New England, as the family intended. So as Bethany became the site manager of that, she was going through, some of the records and found evidence of this reading club. And to honor the legacy of these women and to promote the farm, she revived the book group. And it has been going since 2000. We do not meet weekly, we meet monthly.
And we do not knit.
We do not knit, no. And we have a way of choosing books that is a little bit prescribed, but we also take some liberties. Since it's based in a historic farm, it's a history-based book club, so that our selections have to be by a New England author, set in New England, made reference to New England. But as I said, we have some pretty tenuous connections that we honor. So we have lively discussion. We rotate to people's homes. We sometimes meet at the farm in the visitor center, and then we sometimes meet in each other's homes. And we alternate a fiction book with a nonfiction book every other month. So we get a sort of cross-section of books that relate to New England. We each suggest books, and we don't have a formal way of selecting. It's sort of by, yeah, that sounds like a good book, and people will agree, and we'll go, okay, we need a nonfiction, and we try to go 3 or 4 months out so that we can plan. We have about 22 members. In any given month, we have probably 12 to 15 who are actively attending, and we have amazing discussions.
Thank you, Doris.
Wow. I'm Jana Navratil, and I feel like I have the opposite book club because this one, I'm going to tell you about two, but this one is the Bicoastal Bibliophiles, and we are completely technology related because none of us live well, we're from East Coast to West Coast, bi-coastal, with one in Montana. So 3 of us are on the West Coast. I'm in Seattle and 2 are in San Jose. Emily is here, where are you? Is in Connecticut, and then we have one in Charleston and one in Montana. And we met at a book event in 2012, I believe, and we just wanted to keep the connection together. Let me just double check. Our first meeting was in 2014, but I think we might have met in 2012, but at a book event in Santa Cruz, and 2 of them work in technology, one especially, and he just arranged, let's meet on, let's just have a Skype book club. We don't actually use Skype, but we do use our computers, and it's some app that he sends us the link, and we hook in, and we talk to each other. We do it every 2 months, and we pick the book we start by saying what we've read for the last couple of months since we've seen each other, and then we discuss the book, and then we just throw something out, and I just somehow organically we end up with a book. Never any of us have read it before, so it's always a guess, what it's going to be, and usually it's been wonderful. Once in a while, one of us will start it, and then we'll let the other ones know, no, we can't do this, and we change. But this Christmas, Ryan he's the one from Santa Cruz, made us all a book with all of the books that we've done so far, with a beautiful photography and the date. We discussed it. I'm now keeping notes in the end because we're about to be 2 past the book, and hopefully he'll make a part 2. But it's just been wonderful, and it's fun. We try to get together. We were able to get together and see David Mitchell in San Francisco a couple of years ago. All of us, not all, but the ones that could. So, and Emily's here today, wherever she is. She's one of them. So that's one, and it's wonderful. And then the other one I also met at a book event, 7 of us originally. We all met in Manchester, Vermont, and Jennifer Entwistle was one of them, and she had this wonderful idea because we wanted to keep in touch. We became very close, but none of us lived anywhere near each other. Well, one's in Newburyport, one's in Concord, and then we're from Switzerland, and she's here tonight, and Seattle, I'm in Seattle, and then Albuquerque, and where am I missing? LA, yeah, Beverly Hills. And so the way that we worked out, Jen, I don't know where you got the idea, but what we do is, and we're in round 7, so we all pick a book and a notebook, and we write in our notebook what we think, how we feel about the book and why we picked it. And then we're called it's the Postal Book Club, and then we have a rotation set up. So we mail it to the next person. So every 2 months, I get a book, I send a book, and then I read it and write in it, and I read what the person before me read. And by the end of the year, we've all read a book, and ideally, so far it's worked out pretty well. We try to meet somewhere. We've met in Maine, we've met in Cape Cod, Ireland. We're here. 5 of the 6 of us, I think, are here right now. The one in LA is taken a couple of years off. So anyway, it's wonderful, and so that way it's easy we pick our own book. We don't know what the other one's going to be until we get it and open it, and it's been so fun. We're on round 7. So if you have people in your life, family, friends that aren't able to have a book club with you, you can have a book club no matter where you are. It has been fantastic. So.
Fabulous idea. I love the
Yeah.
high tech and low tech right there. In
Right.
the same.
Yeah.
We're on Skype and I'm putting this in the mail. I live a wonderfully balanced life. I love that. So one of the experiences that we've had in our book group is that we've found, I think one of the reasons that we're willing to take chances on books that don't seem like natural fits for us is because some of the best discussions we've ever had have been about books that we did not all necessarily love. And what I think is we have in common in those discussions is that they sparked some really interesting discussions. And of course, sometimes it's because everyone loves a book. But what would you? Let's start with you, Jean. What would you identify as a great discussion that you've had about a book, and why?
Well, we've had many great discussions, I would say, and some of the favorite books over the years. Killers of the Flower Moon about the Osage Indians in the West. That was a very compelling book for a lot of us. We had a summer of books that focused on racism, different kinds of books, and those are all good discussions. We read Americana by the Nigerian author whose name I can never remember or pronounce, and Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, and then Jodi Picoult's Small Great Things. This was a year or two ago, but it was different perspectives on a topic, so that was a good series of discussions. The discussion of the two sisters that I mentioned, where we all donned the hijab, we had to look at the issue of these two Somali sisters who their father had brought them to Norway to have a good life and not be in Somaliland, and they chose for various reasons to go join ISIS and marry ISIS fighters, and the perspectives in the book gave us fodder for a very good discussion. The mother's reaction, the father's reaction, the brother who was between the two sisters in age, the two teenage sisters. So those were very good discussions.
And did you find that your group really enjoyed reading those books, or were there some that found them very challenging? Or
the books I've mentioned, yes. There was one that we read recently, a recent book as it turns out, Asymmetry, Lisa Holliday's. I was the only one in our group who liked it, but then I come from a writing perspective too. But people, I was kind of disappointed because I had chosen to lead that discussion. But it still made for a good discussion because we could look at it different ways. And just wanted to mention one more thing that we did a couple of years ago. There's a book, a nonfiction book. Again, we read all sorts of stuff in our group, and it was called The Glass Universe by David Sobel? Anyway, it's about the astronomers at Harvard in the late 1800s who were doing all of the work that the guys got credit for, and they weren't even allowed to go look at the telescope, through the telescope, because that was not ladylike at that point in time. I also volunteer for the Merrimack Rep Theater in Lowell, which is a great little theater, and they were doing a play at that point when we were reading that book called The Silent Sky, and it had some of the people mentioned in the book in a different kind of story in the play. So a group of us from the book club went to the play, and then we had the benefit of discussing not only the nonfiction book, which was a little bit heavy going, fascinating but heavy going, with the fictional depiction in the play. So that was fun.
wonderful, thank you. Earl, what do you think your most spirited discussion was?
Well, the Bible,
I know the
obviously.
Bible, right?
Yeah,
Spirited?
but I'm going to leave that for a 3-hour panel discussion next year. We did some tricky things. We did something that was really interesting. Booktopia, which was held in Manchester, Vermont every year, and Chris, my partner, and I went several times. There was a woman there, Paula McLean, wrote a book called The Paris Wife, and we were chatting, and again, because we're a mixture of men and women, we decided to read The Paris Wife, which is the perspective of Hadley, Ernest Hemingway's first wife, and then we decided to read A Movable Feast at the same time, which gives you Hemingway's perspective, very different, but boy, we're reading about Hadley, and then we're reading about him, and womanizing and different things, and it was a fascinating discussion, and I think it helped both the men and women kind of understand men and women. It was very tricky, and it's certainly a different time period than now, and with the Me Too movement, I'm sure we'd be having even greater discussion about that. We read most of our works are older works, like Don Quixote, Moby Dick, Brothers Karamazov, hope I pronounced it right, but we read Hillbilly Elegy. It's one of the few contemporary works we read, and it was very spirited because our demographic is very interesting. It's older. I'm in my early 60s. We have someone in their 40s, but most people are in their 60s and 70s. And we started discussing, and we have people, I'm sort of a blue-collar kid. Didn't come from a lot. We had someone that came from a lot of money, went to Smith. And we were all different. One's an academic at Middlebury College. And it was fascinating to discuss socioeconomics. And some people would say, pull up your bootstraps. And then some of us that came from a different world. I was in the military, which I was in the Navy, not the Marine Corps. But we all had these different perspectives about wealth and money and how easy it is or isn't. And he happened to go to, I think, Yale. And one of our friends went to Yale, or her family went to Yale. And it was just fascinating that, because I didn't understand a lot about her life, and she didn't understand a lot about mine. And I think it was heated, but fascinating. And we all love each other. And I wrote a little thing here. You know how we all wear masks? When you're in a book group and you meet almost every week for 6 or 7 years, the masks go away. I mean, we've shared stuff. And no one in my book group is here, and you won't know who they are. But you know, everything from abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, sad things in relationships. And you know, I said we joke that it's therapy, but boy, oh boy, you leave there, and then when we don't meet for a couple months, wow, I miss my gang. So that's pretty powerful. But yeah, the Bible definitely heated.
Yeah, that's a bigger discussion than we can have here.
We're going to read it again.
I think you're supposed to read it like every day. If you're
Thank
doing
you.
If you're
Thank
doing
you.
it right.
We'll talk backstage.
Jana, what do you think about your most spirited discussion? Yours is a nice Skype fight.
Yes, I have an answer to that. I did want to backtrack and say I think I left Vermont out. I left Chris out of our postal club. She's key to it, and that at the end of the postal we get our book back with our notebook. Is that clear? Maybe that's obvious.
Oh, yeah.
That you can then see what everyone thought about your book. So I just wanted to make sure I'm clear because I get nervous and I don't know what I'm saying. So in our Skype book, definitely the most heated conversation, and I think it still comes back almost every meeting, is A Little Life. And it is absolutely love it or hate it. How many of you have read it? Do you know the Hana Yanagihara? Have you read this book? Love it or hate it. It's not. It's dark. I loved it. We have Julia in Montana hated it, and she was. And we had wonderful discussion. I think we all agreed that we were glad we read it, but it was an incredible hour of fighting over that book in a really good way. I still recommend it, but it was intense. And a book called The Enchanted by Renee Denfield. I think my books are not ringing a bell. It's about there's the cover, I don't know if you can see it, but it's about a man on death row. And like I said, none of us had read it before. We all went into it, and I don't know where we read a review or what, but I have never been so moved by a book. I mean, death row, dark, but yet, well, here's what I wrote. Haunting and grim, but absolutely unforgettable and beautiful. And the author is actually, in real life, an investigator who had been, she knew of what she wrote. But there's also a little bit of magical realism that goes through it too. It's incredible, and it's not that we didn't agree it's just that we all were, I think, a little blown away by it, and it was a wonderful discussion. So that one is my most memorable.
So I'm curious about in the fight that you had, or the spirited discussion that you had. Did you find yourself learning things? You were talking about how you discovered that class really entered that conversation. Did you find yourself learning things about the members of your group that you didn't know?
Yeah, I think definitely you learn where people come from and what there's reasons why people are affected by books and hate them. There's reasons that they love them and embrace them. Yeah, we all bring every book we've ever read, every experience we've ever had, how we grew up, we bring that with us. So when you're sharing that with 6 people, or 20 or however many, you learn a lot about each other and yourself. Yeah, I love it.
Doris, what do you think about I've been part of some spirited discussions in our group.
Well, the couple that we picked out as a group were Never Caught And this is about the runaway slave from George Washington. Interestingly, both of these are nonfictions, but Never Caught was the story of how this slave escaped from George Washington's ownership and plantation, came to New Hampshire. There's our New England connection. And we had an amazing discussion about race and slavery and class, and George Washington being this paragon of virtue, or maybe not. And that was a very interesting discussion. And the other one that we chose was No More Words. And that is a sort of combination memoir or biography of Anne Morrow Lindbergh, written by her daughter. And the focus was on aging and what happens when you age beyond the ability to care for yourself. And it brought out a lot of feelings about people we have either cared for, how we feel about our own aging process. And that was a very spirited discussion. And I will say that we have developed a rating system so that when we've read a book, we rate it on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 being the best book we've ever read, 1 being the book we can't believe we sat through and read. So, and Bethany, as our fearless leader, keeps track of our ratings. So it's just kind of fun to go back and look and see what we rated high and maybe why, and what we rated really low. Now, we rate it based on our individual perceptions of the literary quality and if it spoke to us and what we got out of the book. We don't have any criteria that we slot into. It's just, how did this book affect me? And so again, we can have this whole discussion, and then when it comes to the ratings, sometimes people will come in and say, well, I read this book and I thought it was a 3. But after, hearing everybody's discussion, I think I'm going to give it a 4. So it's very interesting, and I agree with what you were saying, Earl, that we learn from each other, we learn about each other, and we learn about ourselves. So it's fun to see how our discussion matches our ratings, or how our ratings match our discussion.
I had a funny moment. I was fairly young in 2000, believe it or not, almost 20 years ago, and I had started this group, and there was a certain amount of gravitas in the room, and Doris is actually part of the little family who originally owned the property. And I suggested a book that had seemed quite innocuous to me, but in rereading it in the group, I discovered that there was a lot of graphically described sexuality in this book, which I had not considered when I recommended it to the group. And we got back together, and Doris is so lovely, and I was really sort of afraid of what was going to happen when we sat down, and this pornography had been read by foisted on these people by me. And we went around the group, and everyone was giving their opinion. And then Doris, this was in the early days of the group, Doris said, well, I could have lived with some fewer nipples.
What was this book?
I can't remember. I honestly can't remember. Oh.
Sorry.
But she was so kind. It was lovely. We've been great friends ever since then. She was like, I liked it, but not so many nipples. It was it was lovely, very, very frank and honest. Ellie, what do you think? What is your most memorable discussion?
Well, much of my book group is here, so I sort of almost want to conduct this as a book group and hear what they think was a memorable discussion.
That might be beyond our scope, but if you have a deep thought, yell it out.
Where are they?
Blindness.
Blindness.
What was it?
Blindness.
Right. Interesting.
I'm hearing Portuguese author, a book called Blindness.
Same one.
Saramato
Who won? Didn't he get a Nobel?
won a
Right.
Nobel Prize. And why
Right.
was that memorable? We're at the audience participation portion of the event.
Carol?
I can't remember is the right answer. Why is it memorable? I don't know. Well, now we'll have to read it to find out why it was so memorable. Well, thank you for putting that back on us. I love it. So I know we don't have,
I think also you would get a different title from almost each one of us. And for instance, the book I adored was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And I brought my dog to that discussion, now deceased, but she agreed with everything I said. And what we usually do, our group of 12 or 14, and most of the time we're that full, is we have dessert and wine for a half hour and socialize, and then we really pretty much stay on topic, or else I beat them.
Not a benevolent dictator. So I have one more question, then we'll take some questions from the audience. But I've had the experience recently, and we actually had the experience of a group of bringing books that were very important to us when we were at a different stage in our lives, and rereading them with the group. And I don't know if any of you have had that experience, or if you in your own life have had the experience of going back to a book that you read at a very different time in your life, and how did the experience of rereading it and maybe discussing it with your group, I don't know if that is true of any of the other groups, but how was that for you? Ellie, do you want to?
Well, I think since our group was founded with the idea of feminism, we've read Portrait of a Lady twice. And I had read it actually a couple of other times as well, growing up, getting a sense of what it would be like to be a young woman, and then another character in the book, a middle-aged woman, and then as feminism and really the woman's position has changed in this country enormously. Looking at it, let's say from this perspective, goodness, couldn't Isabel Archer do something more than become a wonderful hostess? Wasn't there more for her than that in terms of a position in the world? Guess not. Not for a book that came out in 1881. And here we are. But I think that many of us found that Isabel Archer, now that we're no longer 20 or 25, that somehow she enters that book, the protagonist of Portrait of a Lady, which is a big novel, 500 pages. She enters it with this great sense of expectancy. My life is going to be wonderful. And how disappointed she is. And we are with her. So that's been very interesting. But seeing her also as a spoiled young woman who has been made much of. Were we all spoiled? I don't think so, but maybe.
It's very interesting.
So it's been fascinating.
Now I have to go back and read that book too. Well, this is getting longer and longer.
Can I say that we based the decision to go back to either childhood or earlier adulthood books on Anne Hood's book, The Book That Mattered Most. And so we read that, and then we had a really good discussion about that book. And then we decided, okay, next month we're each going to pick a book, as Bethany said, that affected us at some point in our life, and that we would go back and reread and then say how it affects us now. And we had fantastic discussion. There were no duplicates. Everybody had a different book that affected them at some point in their lives. And in going back over the books that we found that the ladies, as we call the founders, that the ladies read, we think that they might have done the same thing, because we found reference to Elsie Dinsmore, which is actually a children's book. And it sounded like they had some discussion about Elsie Dinsmore. So then we said, well, gee, maybe they did the same thing. Maybe they said, what book affected us in our childhood, and went back and read that.
Yeah. So did you all read the book, or did you each read your own?
We each
and then
read
you
our
talked
own.
about
Yes.
all the books.
We
I
each
love
read our
that.
own, the one that
Okay.
affected us.
I love
And then we
that.
shared it with the group.
We
That's
did
a
that
great
in our
idea.
club too, and it was a very interesting discussion. And as you say, no duplicates.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
some very, the book that I reread was Anne Morrow Lindbergh. You mentioned her
okay,
earlier. The Gift from the Sea, which my mother gave me. I hate to say when she gave it to me, but around the time when it was published. And I read it as a young girl, And of course, I thought I understood it then, but rereading it now, it's so much richer. There was a time, though, in between those two poles of my young reading and my recent reading when I used a passage of it in my wedding about the dancing and remaining partners, but being able to move within the dance together and apart sometimes. But it was very interesting for people to go back and do that,
Yeah.
as you say. I also I forgot to add when we were introducing that our book club meets monthly. And anyone is welcome. We're in the library, so we'd love to see you.
And there's food in that one too. So.
That's right. 6:30 of the first Monday of the month.
So I have a sense that Jana's gonna do this with her Skype group. I got a little.
Yeah, that might be fun.
And I think the rest of us are all gonna start mailing books and notebooks to our friends.
Highly recommend you do.
Wonderful. Well, we didn't even scratch the surface. It's really a terrible tease because we have had so much to discuss, but I don't want to keep you too long, and I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions or share something about the book club that you're in or whatever you would like. There's a microphone up here. You can stand up and yell. I can't see you, so you'll just have to fight it out. Any of you have? Yes.
I just moved down from Vermont. I was up there for 25 years. I grew up in Massachusetts. And we met I was in the book group the whole time. 25 years, same group. 10 women, few changes. We met monthly. And what we would do is we would have dinner. And it came out about once a year because we wouldn't do Christmas time, maybe one time in the summer. So once a year you'd have everybody over. And what I loved about it is we didn't have many rules, but one of the rules was when you hostess, you do everything. So that nobody has to wonder if they should be cleaning the roasting pan or helping you load. You just knew that you had dinner and didn't have to do anything when it wasn't your night. And I loved that rule. And what we did is, like, if I was hostessing, I would have like 3 books that I'd take out of the library, or I have them, and I'd say, these are my 3 suggestions. And then you'd explain what each one was about and say why you think each one might be great. And then we'd vote. And we met every month for 25 years, and I've moved down here, and I'm very interested in a book group.
You came to the right place.
Yeah, I love these are great things to learn.
It's wonderful. Anyone else? Yes.
Earl, could you talk a little bit? You had told me that you read short stories and you did deep reading, and that was so profound because you saw that each person sort of put things into the book that actually wasn't there.
Well, it's fascinating today because I had the chance to hear Russell Banks and Steve Yarbrough, 2 authors. I love their work. And they were talking about that, how you become sort of, it's interactive. And we read a lot of Alice Munro, and I think those were some of the deepest discussions we had. And I mean, we read the Bible, we read Moby Dick, but they were, because it's so compact, and then we would do close reading, I guess you would, someone would say, this is what happened, set the scene. And again, all our biases, who we are, and then we would go back and say, I don't remember that, and we'd read the exact paragraph or page, and it doesn't say any of those things. That's great when you're the one that's debating and taking them on, but when it's you, which it happened to me, it happened to one of my friends, there was a female character, I can't remember the exact short story, but she's in this room, and everyone had fabricated who and what she is, but we are not given anything really. She's a woman in a room with some men. Could she be a prostitute? Could she be someone they've kept there and she's like under their control, and all these people fabricated. I mean, they're fabricated. And so that, and then we read the Dubliners, which I think are like 15 short stories. And that was one of our last clusters of books, and that was fascinating because I read it when I was younger. Back to your previous question, it's wow, you come to this older and you have all this, the adventures setting out in Ireland, and we were fortunate to go with Jan and a few friends to Ireland, and then you're there in Dublin and hearing the history and going to a prison and hearing about all these terrible things. And it was fascinating. But yes, short stories, if you don't read, we were talking backstage about that. If you don't read short stories, man, you're shortchanging your book group. Just my opinion.
I will say, we do it once a year. We do it for our holiday one, 'cause people can read half of the book or all of them or some of them. So yeah, I absolutely agree. We've had some great discussions with our short stories. Do the rest of you all read short stories as well?
Well, our book group has read poems, we've read short stories, we've read graphic novels, we've read nonfiction, we've read epics, we did one on various ages, like the heroic age, and we read Seamus Heaney's Beowulf, which a former English major, English professor had never read, and it was fascinating, as well as Wonder Woman, the secret history of Wonder Woman, the age of apartheid, the age of dystopian novels, Orwell's, and then we read private utopias, Candide, and the poet laureate Tracy Smith, Life on Mars. If you can't do it here, do it on Mars.
It's wonderful. We'll take one more question, then I'm getting the Vicky cane stomp from the backstage area. Yes, I can see you waving.
A question for the panelists. How do you have any tips for facilitating discussions for nonfiction works? Like, I've always found that that's way more difficult to kind of like get a cohesive discussion going for something that's nonfiction than fiction, because then you have your character, your plot, you have a lot of things that you can kind of latch into as a starting point for conversation. But with nonfiction, it's a little bit more, it feels unruly in a way.
If you have a theme, it plugs right in.
Or, in our case, we always have the discussion leader come with a set of questions. And we may not get to all the questions, we may not do them in that order or whatever, but it's something to fall back on if the discussion is not going to take off on its own.
And I think we look at the issues that are raised in nonfiction. I talked about a couple of the ones that generated good discussion. We read a great book called The Good, Good Pig, and that generated a whole lot of discussion about agriculture and farms and animal treatment. And so I think focusing on the issues rather than the plot, because in nonfiction there's not usually much of a plot. So we've had amazing discussions with nonfiction.
Although the issues come out in the fiction books too.
Oh, sure, sure.
Right, I saw a hand sort of in the...
I just wanted to follow up that as a writer of nonfiction, I actually wrote Reader's Guide. That's in the paperback edition and in the website of Penguin Random. So how useful is the Reader's Guide questions to you at all?
No, I think they are useful.
Yeah, there you go.
I think they are very useful and very helpful, and they're a great template, I think, to hold a discussion together and to take off from and come back to, and I think they're very valuable. We always start with a list of questions. As I said, we may not do them in order or all of them, but they're very helpful.
I think individual readers really generate their own questions. I mean, on Vietnam, we had someone who had been in Vietnam, Nancy Warner, on what is the memoir about a hawk that we read?
Ages for Hawk.
Right. We had a hawk trainer among us. I mean, I think that we bring as a group, and you have to trust your group, really a wealth of experience, and we're assuming we're all good critical readers. We're not making mistakes about what we've read, but we're bringing our own richness to it, and that beats the questions online you can get about a book. You know, I mean,
We
they're
appreciate the
really,
effort.
a former English teacher, excuse me, but a former English teacher knows how you get those questions. You know, that they're, I want to say, without a personal interest. They're assuming we're not good readers. And our group is a group of very good readers. 30 some odd years of reading as a group. How can you beat that? 83? More than that. How many years? Woo.
Well, Ellie, you said everyone reads the book because they're retired or they're older, they have the time.
Right.
I'm curious with the rest of the group and you, are there people that don't read the book? Because we have this thing, you know, where, you know, when you're in college and you're reading late and all of a sudden you ask these really like superfluous, crazy questions. So what do you think of the philosophical point of view of a character? And you know they probably haven't read it. Because I do it all the time, like the Bible, oh, I didn't read that Psalm section. But well, what do you think? I mean, do people read the books?
Yes.
Or do they not? Or do they fake it?
We only invited
Or-
panelists from
I'm just
groups that
curious.
read the book.
I'm just curious.
My group reads the books, and the question, you know, the questions that we start with, when I do it, I usually embellish them with questions that have come to me and that I think others will be interested in.
Our group definitely reads the books.
We read the book. I did bow out of one recently because it was too close to home for something that was going on personally, but we don't fake it. I didn't read it.
Oh, you
will
get
say-
caught at our group.
Yeah,
trust me.
you
If you
can't
can't finish it
hide.
in our group, we don't judge, but,
Yeah.
but we do judge a little bit. So, with that, I have to say, this was about 1/10 as long as I would like to spend speaking to these wonderful people. And I thank you all for coming out, and if you're not part of a book club, I hope you go find one. And thank you again for all coming. So we're going to turn this back over to Vicki and Jen.
Thank you all so much. That was so informative. We just loved it. What a great way to end the festival. All right, so guess what happens today? We're done. And guess what happens tomorrow? We're not going to do anything with the festival. But we'll be here next year, so we hope to see all of you.
Thank you, everyone.